Good morning. Welcome to the Town Meeting Talk Show here on, what day is it? Tuesday, the 17th of November, 2020. I'm J.R. Lewis, pleased to be your host. Equally pleased to have Cordova Wireless Communications as our sponsor, your local cell phone and wireless data provider, and also the provider of your local on-demand talk show. And somebody had a good idea. Why don't we talk about this survey that we all participated, well, I guess not all, but many people participated in recently about community policing. You might remember doing that. And we have two highly qualified people to talk about the results and what was learned, City Manager Helen Howarth and Acting Police Chief Nate Taylor. They are our guests today on the Town Meeting program, which, as always, we hope you find extremely informative. All right, blah, 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 blah. Look, there it goes. Wonderful. All righty. We're going to try it again here now instead. All right. 3, 2, 1. Chief, we're going to start with you here to introduce you, I guess, in a sense, for the benefit of anybody that hasn't met you or know your background. What is your history in Cordova, and how did you come into this position?
I moved to Cordova in 2012 when I was hired by the Cordova Police Department. And so I've worked here since then. And I worked closely with Chief Hicks as he was going about his tenure here. And so that's sort of how I came in to be recommended to the chief's position as he was retiring, and I had worked with him closely over the last couple of years with the leadership here at the department. I kind of knew where we were at, and he recommended, and I accepted that role.
Okay, good. Well, and is it agreeing with you so far?
So far, it's very interesting. Yes, I'm enjoying it. It's obviously a little bit more than just patrolling as we normally do and doing the regular stuff. But yeah, I enjoy it.
Yeah, well, and just an interesting time. The subject of policing is an interesting one around the country. So, Helen, how did this whole survey come about now? What prompted it?
I think it was a couple of things, but directly related to what you just described is there was a national conversation going on around policing. What is policing for each community? What's important? What's not important? How are police responding? And I realized as I was talking to folks here in Cordova that people were really not aware of what our police department did, why they did it, how they did it. I had some questions around what's our use of force policy, what sorts of things do our police do when they respond to calls. Then we did have a couple of Black Lives Matter rallies here, and it just seemed like it was the right time to answer those questions and really focus in on what our police department is to this community and what the community wants it to be. And with the retirement of Chief Hicks, it seemed like a really great opportunity to focus in on what we are, who we are as a community, what our needs are, and how the police department can best represent those needs. So we did a survey, and we had a phenomenal response. It was really exciting to see. It clearly was a potent topic for our community, and this conversation today is one of several we're going to have to help make visible to the community who our police are and how we are utilizing them in our community and start a dialogue on a deeper level. So we're very excited, JR, that you are opening up this conversation, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with the community.
Sure. Well, and we will be eagerly involved all throughout the process in a number of ways if things go according to plan. Back to you, Chief. Let's talk a little bit about the department. I mean, how many people are in it? Who are they? How long have they been there? That kind of thing.
Sure. We have 5 dispatchers Most of them have been here for several years. We did add one dispatcher in this year, but he had actually worked for us in the past. So it was sort of a seamless transition. One left and we hired in one who had already worked for us. We currently have myself and 3 police officers. I've been here the longest of all those and had a role in hiring all the other 3 that are here. So we don't have a nobody's been here a long time, but they're all younger officers such as myself, and so it looks as though we'll be able to have a qualified staff for a number of years going forward, and that was sort of my thought process this year with hiring the new officer that we did hire so far, is that hiring younger officers to be able to be here in our community for a long time and sort of get that, get integrated with our community.
Good.
Nate, quick thing, Nate, maybe you can describe a little bit about why we have 5 dispatchers, because I think the community might be interested in knowing that we serve other communities as well with that.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, we do have 5 dispatchers, and part of the reason, obviously, is the 24/7 coverage that our dispatchers need to provide. There's always got to be somebody there, so there's only so many hours in a day. And the other part of that is that we have a contract service with the city of Whittier and Girdwood. They're served by one police department over there, and we're contracted to them to provide their dispatching services. So our dispatchers not only provide our 911 and dispatch services, they also provide dispatch services for the other community on a contract basis. They pay us for that service.
Wow. Well, I mean, you talk about things folks might not have known that our department does and why it's staffed the way it is to do those things. It's certainly one I had no idea was going on, and I've been aware of our department for 30-some years, or right around there at any rate. So that's fascinating. How would you describe, Chief, the role of the CPD sort of pre-survey, I guess? I mean, presuming there are some things that could change or shift, but, the mission, the priorities, interacting with the community, that kind of thing.
I think overall our mission has probably been pretty much the same throughout the years, and I think that's to, enforce the laws of the state and the city and to provide a safe community for our citizenry here. And, I think that's kind of been our priority all along. And the survey just sort of, I think, highlighted some areas that perhaps the community needs to know more about, which is why we're doing some of these things, and some areas that maybe we need to focus on more, or at least inform the community that we are focusing on them if we already were.
And is there a lot of interaction with I mean, you mentioned the dispatching service for other communities. What about other interaction with other towns or with the state so you can fulfill that mission?
Well, we interact primarily here in Cordova, obviously with the other law enforcement entities that exist here. So the Alaska Wildlife Troopers, we interact with them, and they assist us when necessary. While they primarily enforce wildlife things, they're not opposed to helping us out with other things, and we're not opposed to helping them out either. So we interact closely with Wildlife Troopers, and then there is also one Forest Service law enforcement officer here, and our department obviously works on that level as well. From my level, I work with the state through the Fusion Center in Anchorage, which is a collaborative effort between the troopers and the marshals and federal agents, and we get information briefings and that kind of thing on that level, state intelligence-wise, that keep us up to date on what's happening across the state and around the nation.
Okay, Helen, anything to add from your perspective as city manager on the role of the police department?
I think that survey was really where we wanted to focus, is making sure that the police department and our public safety department is serving the needs of our community. And the role, I think, is fairly clear in that it's given that police departments are to provide for public safety. The question always is, well, how much? And I know I get calls, or have gotten calls since I took on this job, from folks who were like, I heard someone outside my door, and I called the police and no one came. And I think the expectations of the community around, how the police force responds is another piece that is something we could probably have a whole conversation on, a whole meeting on. But I think that's a really big part of it is how does our police respond? What are the kinds of calls they respond to? And what is the definition of public safety in the bigger sense of things? What expectations should the community have of our police force? And that's another reason, again, for these conversations is to make sure that the police department understands the expectations, but the public also understands the reality of what kind of response they can expect. And I will say that with we've been operating on a pretty small number of officers. We've recently hired a couple of new ones, which allows them to do more, or will allow them to do more in the future. So we just need to have a good balance of the numbers of officers to the number of calls and the expectations.
Well, and I can tell you, again, we've been part of the community since 1992, and this is by no means a new issue. I mean, I remember decades ago, going to council meetings. It was when maybe the first couple of years I started covering council meetings, and it was interesting that people would say, "Oh, we have too many police officers. It's a small town. There's no crime. We only need 2. Don't tax us for police officers." And then, and the reason I really remember it is there was one person that offered that testimony to council, and then I don't know, 2-3 months later, called our talk show to complain that they had some sort of an issue with their house and called the police, and the police weren't there in less than 5 minutes. And, something has to be done, so police show up when you call them. And, so, I mean, it's like so many challenging issues, particularly things that involve life and safety, where sometimes rationality and a sense of reality doesn't always kick in. So it'll be interesting to see what the survey revealed in terms of that particular problem, which, like I said, is by no means new. Let's talk, and Chief, maybe I'll start with you on this. When you're recruiting, how does that process work? What are you looking for in your candidates? Just cover the whole hiring process if you can.
Oh boy, yeah, I'll try to narrow it down. Obviously, that's a big task with a lot of variables. But in general, we recruit through various media and website, not only press releases from the city and stuff on the city's webpage, but also statewide through the Alaska Police Standards Council, who puts ads out there for us, and the Alaska Municipal League, who will put an ad out there for us, and state job services. And then we recruit nationally as well through a couple of recruiting or job-seeking type agencies. And generally, what we're looking for, it's not a whole real specific set of things. It's generally, somebody who's has integrity, honesty, work ethic. Those are the biggest things in a police department looking for in recruiting officer, somebody you want to be an officer, is honesty and integrity, because that primarily makes up a person who's able to do the job of a police officer. Because if officers lose that credibility and integrity, they're really hampered through our court system with being able to do their job. So those are the primary things we look for. I personally was looking at hiring younger officers who would be able to remain here, who had a desire to live in our rural community for a number of years, so that, one, it helps us with recruiting. If we get people who want to stay here, we don't have to recruit quite so often. And two, it helps the community because they can become integrated members of our community, live here, stay here, develop relationships. And that just helps our department. The more people know us and relate to us, the better off we can do our job, because we have more interaction and people are, there to help us. So we appreciate that interaction with the community.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's sort of built into our life much more than, some of these larger communities where you hear the LAs and the New Yorks and Chicagos and whatever, talking about that they only feel like they ever see their police at the worst time, when it would be nice if, like in the old beat cop days, when people actually knew who their officers were and developed a relationship, and the officers then knew the community and understood the dynamics of the different subsets of the community. And well, I mean, I guess I should ask you, do we have that dynamic in Cordova, do you think, or are we, say, more unique in that the community is much more integrated overall?
Well, I think we do have that dynamic of, our officers being parts of the community. And you're correct. In large agencies and large cities, officers generally try to remain anonymous from the city because there are credible threats in big cities generally towards them. And so they try to live a little bit more anonymously. Oftentimes they don't even live in the cities they police in. Here we don't have that. We have the other dynamic of that our community is a relatively safe community, and we enjoy being, at least I enjoy being a member of our community. I think our officers do too. And I think we're developing that. I've been here for 7 years. Our officer Hayden, he has a family here, and his family has been here for their lives, and so I think we're kind of developing that with our officers. A couple of whom who've been here for a while, and even our new officer we just hired and got here, he's planning on having a family here and developing a life here. So I think we have that opportunity in our city to become really close with folks, and I think we're taking advantage of that.
Good.
And I will say that one of the issues that did come up or was mentioned in the survey was that the public in general didn't necessarily know the officers, didn't know who they were, and maybe they weren't visible. And so that's one of the things that Nate and his team have been talking about. Maybe you can address that a little bit. I know it's still early to say what's actually going to be on the ground. Part of it was just getting enough officers to make it possible for them to be visible.
Yeah.
I'd say that's definitely the case with the number of officers. As you said earlier, we've been short-staffed for the last several years with 3 officers, maybe 4 officers, and so it doesn't allow us to fill our schedule, and it doesn't allow us some of the other opportunities. And with hiring to fill our complete staff levels, we'll be able to have that as Helen said. We'll be able to have more officers out, visible, doing things, interacting, and participating in community events and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you could follow the great example of other departments in making YouTube videos singing along to Lady Gaga songs or something like that, and I'm sure your ratings would just... How, since becoming acting chief, Nate, have you made many changes, or has there not really been time for that yet?
Yeah, I have not made a lot of changes, no. Kind of taking it slow, getting the feel of my position and where our department is and what we have and that sort of thing. And primarily, my main focus over the last couple of months was the recruiting and the hiring, because it takes some time for everything to be processed through that. We've made a few, minor tweaks and stuff here and there. In some of the information that we're putting out, trying to be a little more active on our Facebook page and trying to be a little more, giving a little bit more information out in our press releases and but just because that was one of the results of the survey that people said, hey, maybe they didn't know about what we were doing. So we're trying to inform everybody kind of what we're doing, what we're out there every day, kind of completing and doing what takes up our time.
We're speaking with Acting Police Chief Nate Taylor and City Manager Helen Howarth here on Town Meeting. Some initial digging into that policing survey we did a while back. And Helen, why don't let's open the box here now on the survey. You said participation was good. You seemed happy with the number of people that did it. What were some of the main findings, and were there any surprises, do you think?
I think really what was clear is that people felt good about our police department. They had suggestions on things that can be improved, and that's a really good thing, because there's nothing that can't be improved in some way or another. And we have an opportunity with new officers coming in to, pivot in some ways in certain areas. There was nothing dramatic, except that just what Nate was talking about, it was really clear that people were unaware, did not know, and we need to do a much better job about communication. If all the community sees is the number of police calls reported in the local newspaper, and that's the only thing they know about our police department, you can get a slightly skewed impression of need. Do we really need this many officers? And as we have opportunity to really share the information with the community about what our officers are doing, Another thing we do, for instance, is we have a contract with the airport. So we are required, as city, we have a contract to provide security services at the airport for every flight coming and going, commercial flight coming and going. That takes time, and we're contractually obligated to provide those services. So, there's all these little pieces that help create a sense of what it is that we're doing, and it was really evident in the survey that we have not been doing a good job communicating that. So that is probably the biggest takeaway from the survey.
Well, and as you say that, I can think of all kinds of ways that we can cook up to hopefully alter that, and that'll be part of our future conversations about this, which I'm excited about, because we love doing that kind of thing. Chief, what about you? Any big surprises out of the survey?
No, as Helen said, the primary result of the survey was that folks were, they're appreciative of our police department, and I think the biggest thing folks said they wanted us to do was enforce laws and prosecute criminals. So, that was encouraging because that's what we do. It's our primary job. So, the fact that folks primarily wanted us to do what we are supposed to do, that was good. And then, as Helen said, I think a lot of it just revolved around information, and that folks didn't understand what we may be doing. We hadn't put it out there to show them what we actually are doing. So we're working on that. We're working on putting stuff out there, information out.
Okay. Well, and like I said, we'll eagerly participate in that with you. Naturally, when you do a survey that is fairly wide-ranging, there are going to be some topics that bubble up to the surface, and the community seem to be interested in understanding, or they may not, and wanted to know more about a few particular areas. So why don't we, like drug use was up there at the top of the list. So what should the community know about how our police are addressing that problem? And Helen, maybe we can start with you, unless you want to defer.
I am actually going to defer because in my experience, I have not seen any big issues. But there are members in the community who've been here longer and have. And again, drug use was probably the number one topic of concern for survey respondents. Okay,
so Chief, in terms of understanding our local police departments comprehension of drug use in Cordova, how help folks to understand how you guys view that and how you're approaching it.
Well, yeah, as Helen said, drug use was one of the primary topics that rose up. Folks wanted to see that enforced and prosecuted. It doesn't represent a large section, I don't think, of the crime in our community, but it certainly is there. And it does exist. It's a difficult topic or crime to enforce and prosecute. So a lot of our enforcement around that has not been as strong as it should have been over the last year or two because of our staffing levels, and we're just kind of short-staffed. We do have a drug dog now, and that's our primary goal with the dog that we got this past year. Through the help of the state and NVE, we were able to get the money to get that dog, get our officer trained, and all that. That's our primary goal with that dog, is to use that dog to do drug enforcement. That being said, a lot of the use of that dog is going to revolve around traffic stops. That's one place they're primarily used. So the officer with the dog is probably going to be conducting some traffic stops, and that's probably one of the sole goals of that is to then get the ability to work into preventing and intercepting drugs. So I'd say, folks in the community, if you notice we're doing a little bit more traffic enforcement, part of the reason behind that may be that we are trying to push a little bit more drug suppression with the dog.
Okay. Now, another bullet point I see here on the list of things that popped out from the survey is something called police perspectives. So what, maybe kind of define that a little, if you would, Chief, and what is the response to that issue?
And I believe that primarily kind of centered around folks kind of wanted to know what we thought of things. and what our perspective was on the community and crime and that sort of a stuff. So I think that's sort of, doing these types of things and putting out press releases to just inform folks where we're at with things and what we think. Overall, I think this is a great city, and I think it's, we do almost always rank at one of the safest cities in Alaska every year because we are a safe community. That being said, that's what we're here is to kind of keep it that way, where our presence and our interactions with the community, kind of define those why it's safe.
Okay. And then another topic was repeat offenders. What did the survey reveal with regard to either what people thought about that issue or maybe they didn't know and wanted you to speak to it?
Yeah, I think that was kind of the idea with the repeat offenders section, was that folks see a lot of repeat offenders and they see perhaps them not maybe getting punished how they think they should. And I think the folks just need to realize that the punishment side of law enforcement is solely up to the court. So while we can arrest and we can charge, after that point, district attorneys and defense attorneys and the courts primarily decide where the punishment lies. Some of that, of course, occurred, over the years with SB 91 and that whole deal, and then that got changed. So we're seeing some of that even this year being changed back with, letting people out with no bail. That's sort of scaled back a little bit. We are now seeing that people are actually getting bail applied and being held with the conditions of bail. So, the repeat offender issue, I think has been tackled a little bit by the court system in trying to curb that a little bit more. But largely, if folks get light or what people consider to be light sentences, that's solely up to the courts and the lawyers. They're the ones that decide that. The law, on our end, we don't decide any of that.
That's a very interesting perspective to have out there, actually, because, of course, you're absolutely right. If somebody's upset that somebody did something and they're back out on the street, they might have a tendency to call and complain to the city or to the to the police department when actually you guys don't have anything to do with that part of it. Helen, I heard you jumping in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Nate, maybe you can talk a little bit about when someone is arrested. We don't have a long-term holding facility, right? Can you talk a little bit about what happens in our community when someone is arrested initially?
Sure. As far as arrests, when someone's arrested initially, they're held on bail if there is bail required by the state for that particular crime. Some crimes don't have bail required and you're allowed to be released. And some crimes the bail has to be set by our magistrate. So if our magistrate sets a bail that the person can afford, they are held here, but we are licensed by the State Department of Corrections to only hold people for 30 days maximum. So usually if they cannot afford their bail or cannot find bail to bail themselves out of jail, within a week or so, we're contacting the troopers to arrange for a transport and have them transported to a longer-term facility, typically Anchorage Correctional Complex. They get transferred up there because obviously we're not going to keep them for weeks at a time if they can't afford to get out.
All right. And then the last of the four kind of main bullet points that came out of the survey for us to look at in this initial program had to do with patrols. What's the information to be shared on that subject, Chief?
Well, with patrols, that pretty much comes down to, staffing. And there's 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week. And when we have enough officers to have somebody out every day patrolling, we definitely do that, such as it are right now. During the day shifts, I'm the officer covering day shifts, and our other officers right now are covering the night shift. So, if I'm busy in my office a lot during the day, I don't get out in the community as much as I'd like to. With full staff, that wouldn't occur. The chief would be able to do his administrative work, and there would still be an officer working with him during the day who could be out and patrolling and be active in the community.
Yeah. That's another thing, another misconception that the city has had to mention, I know at council meetings over the years, is people say, well, what do we need 5 police officers for? Well, all 5 of them aren't on duty simultaneously. It's It seems like you'd have to have at least twice as many, if not three times as many, officers in the pool to cover the various shifts. I mean, because if you had two 12-hour shifts, you got to have a minimum of four, and then if somebody gets sick, and I don't know how your shifts work. I'm just throwing random numbers out there, but again, that applies to dispatchers. It has to do with officers, the whole thing. And you're talking about a work cycle that's 24/7. What is there sort of a standard ratio of how many people you have to have on staff relative to the number of shifts that there are?
Well, with the way we've kind of been operating over the years, if we have 4 patrol officers and the chief, we get about 20-hour-a-day coverage 7 days a week. We can't cover 24. If we have 5, then we can have 24-hour-a-day coverage. So that's sort of the ratio right there. And of course, obviously, as you mentioned, training, vacation, sick time, then that leads into other scheduling, solutions that have to be worked out, such as overtime that other officers are required to work. So,
Sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge with a department that needs to operate 24 hours a day.
Yeah. Helen, let's come back to you now with regard to any of these main bullet points, again, that sort of seem to surface most prominently from the survey. Drug use, police perspectives on things, repeat offenders and patrols. As you heard that conversation unfold with the chief, anything you want to add?
I think all of this can be neatly wrapped up into a bow around the word budget. The resources of city always drives what we can do, and what the community wants, and maybe what the department wants, and what we as city government are able to provide are not always in alignment. And I think what we are always trying to do as city, and what council certainly is trying to do, is to balance what we need to have on the ground for good public safety with the budget and the needs of the department and the expectations of the community. And that's always a big struggle. And as you can imagine, the police force is a fairly substantial part of the overall general fund budget. So we are entering a budget phase right now. We're struggling with revenues because of the low fish catch this year, because of COVID, sales tax, you name it. So once again, it's easy to talk solutions, and it's more difficult to put them on the ground. And I'm working very hard with Nate and other departments here in city to try to create the balance that provides the services that we need, and at a cost that we can afford.
Well, and of course, it's always a challenge to, just because policing is on a lot of people's minds right now, and they're thinking, I just did a survey, so we need to dump a bunch of resources into policing, and forget that from that same pot of money, there are a bunch of other priorities, whether it's snow removal or maintenance of important services that people need that can also have an impact on life and safety. That's always a juggling act.
I think what's interesting too, and this is the puzzle that Nate and I will be working on, is, one of the questions that came up: do we need 24/7 coverage? We need to be creative in our approach to how we can balance all the needs and the budget and make things happen in a good way for communities. So there'll be a lot of conversations in terms of next steps. How do we get where we need to be and provide for the community in the way we do, and give the police department the resources it needs to do that job, whatever it is that we define, and then at the end of the day feel good about it. So we're all going to collaborate and cooperate and really listen to community, and council will be making some difficult budget decisions. And then we as departments and staff will be responding to that in the most effective way we can. Okay.
Chief, speaking of next steps, as Helen said there for the department, as a result of the survey, did it highlight any areas that you think could use immediate well, immediate versus longer term action, just action in general? Any changes in trajectory for the department's goals?
I think the information component is a big one, and getting more information out in timely manners and using our Facebook page and other media sources to do that is definitely a goal of mine, and I think we've kind of put some of that into motion already. Longer term for me is to get everybody on board, get everyone hired that I need to get hired to make the staff up to staff, so that we can have the flexibility within our own schedule here to provide the extra services that folks would like to see us doing. If it's just going to parades or community events, or having that officer who's available to work some specialized kind of stuff to work on the drug issue itself. If we have room there, if we can task that particular person with, you just do that, we'll take care of the rest of the schedule for you. And that's something I think that's going to be coming here, in the next month or two, as we get everybody hired and on board and up to speed. And, hopefully then I'm crossing my fingers and we're not going to have, the need to hire for a while, because that would definitely take a lot off my plate if we don't have to.
Sure. Yeah, it does sound like it takes an awful lot of time. How about you on that one, Helen? You talked about the budget thing being a primary concern. Does the completion of the survey, the analysis of the survey, lay out any paths forward that you see for this department?
I think that the community had a lot of questions, which that's the only path we have, is let's answer those questions and make sure that the police department is responsive to those needs. And then balance the resources that we have with whatever those needs are, and see if we can't make a complete department that addresses what we all are hoping for, which is a really great, safe city.
Okay, well, that's been something that we have been successful at for, as I think the chief mentioned, for many, many years, or one of you mentioned it, how we're routinely recognized as a safe city. But if there's more we can do to make it better or bring it more in line with the desires of the community, that's always worth at least looking at, and then determining if we can afford it, if we have enough people to implement it. So let's move to final thoughts here. Chief, we'll start with you. Anything for us in conclusion after going over all of this?
I think I'd just like to mention that folks are welcome to reach out to the department, call, ask questions. My phone's always open. I've got email. People can email me and ask questions. If you have concerns about something, or you want us to know about something, a lot of crime that may be occurring that we might not know about, especially related to the drug use thing, a lot of that occurs, and obviously it's, fairly well hidden. Folks can help us out a lot by calling and giving us information on that regard, and working with us. A lot of it does require community involvement, especially in the drug side of things, to work those types of crimes and to put those, enforce that type of stuff. So just encourage the community to reach out to us, talk to us, ask us questions. I'll be happy to answer as best I can.
Do we still have a tip line, by the way? I know they put one into place a while back, but I kind of lost touch with whether it's still active.
I believe the tip line is still active, but, as we're moving forward here into the 21st century, we have a Facebook page. You can message us on there. You can, call in and get our emails, and you can send emails to myself directly if you don't want us to go through anyone else. I think, the tip line works, but I think there's other ways of also communicating if folks want to submit tips that way.
Sure. No, that's a good point. I was just curious if it was still out there or not. All right, City Manager, final word. After all of this, what do you want to leave us with?
I believe we are all in really great shape, is what I believe. And I think that the feedback we got from the community is going to be really, has been really important in helping us shape how we want to proceed into the future. There's improvements we can make, and we're going to make them. And I can give an example, Nate, with your final words, maybe you can describe. I look out my window every day at a line of cars, one of which has a tree growing out of it, that are vehicles that have been impounded and otherwise wrecked. And it's not exactly the parade of cars that one would want to see as front and center in our community. And I think Nate, and that was a concern that was raised by the public. We had a number of people asking about why are all these cars sitting right out in front of the police department? And Nate could probably answer that really quickly, but also talk about the things that are being done to address that. So we are actively looking to address the concerns that the community has, and that's just a really easy visual one that we can address.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and since the question is brought up, what is the story with the impounded cars, Chief?
Some of them occur from cases, and in certain cases, the car becomes evidence, and we need someplace to put it where we can be assured it's not going to get tampered with, vandalized, that sort of thing. And since we don't have any secure facility, we end up putting them here. Some other ones are cars that just, got impounded because an individual was arrested out of the vehicle, and we take those cars into custody along with the person. And if they're serviceable, again, we don't want them vandalized, so we put them in a place where they're under 24/7 surveillance. We have worked with getting a quote for securing our impound yard, for making that a secure facility, and now we're working forward in this budget season with seeing if we can put that into the budget to make that happen. So we'll have a secure facility that's out of sight, that we won't have to park them in front of our station anymore.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a good example right there of how I hope all of us can work together, not just with radio, but with every outlet that you can utilize to get information out for asking questions. We already have some plans, the three of us, that we hope are going to come to fruition here in the coming weeks in terms of getting this information out and giving people a broader sense of what the department does. I hope folks found this to be a good first step in that direction, and I really want to thank both of you for joining us on the show today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
City Manager Helen Howarth, Acting Police Chief Nate Taylor on today's edition of the Town Meeting program, brought to you by Cordova Wireless Communications here on KLAM. That's a company that keeps your cell phone dollars that you spend right here in town and brings a bunch of dollars from outside into town, kind of like the way our COVID stimulus plan works, only increased by a factor of, say, 12 to 14. Again, we hope to continue providing you more information on what was learned in this survey in the coming days, weeks, and months. And a reminder that if you joined us in the middle of the show or want to hear it again or want to share it with anybody else, it will go on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Cordova TV. All preempted programming from the 10 a.m. hour will be coming your way, and we thank you for tuning in to Town Meeting.